Hello and good morning. So I thought it would be interesting to read through the books of Ezra and Nehemiah to just kind of understand a little bit of the background regarding um, the post-Babylonian captivity activities, which regard the rebuilding of the temple and the reconstruction of Jerusalem in the aftermath. As I discussed yesterday, those are two separate activities. Both are related to Persian kings, but not the same king and not the same time. They're not the same benchmark. They're not the same activities, and they relate to two different pieces of Daniel 9 on the whole. Daniel, in Daniel 9, the contents of his prayer surround the end of the 70 years of Babylonian captivity and the request for God to remove the curses that got them removed from their land, because the Deuteronomy curses involve Israel being physically removed from the land for not following the law, which is what the Babylonian captivity was. So understanding that the 70 years that Jeremiah prophesied were being accomplished, which is what Daniel 9 starts off with, Daniel is praying to God to remove the curses and allow them to return to Israel to rebuild the temple that was destroyed during the Babylonian captivity. However, the 70 weeks prophecy starts with the rebuilding of the city, not the temple. So those are two different benchmarks. And the video that I did yesterday went through that because a lot of people kind of inaccurately timed to the same event because they use Isaiah 44 and 45, two specific verses, one from each of those chapters. And so I kind of went through that to show how Cyrus was prophesied to discuss or to prophesy. Cyrus was prophesied to prophesy the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the laying of the foundation of the temple. But he was only specifically involved in one of those things, and that was the temple, and that's the book of Ezra. Artaxerxes was involved in the rebuilding of the city, which was almost 90 years later. That's what Nehemiah is about. So two very different things, but the Persian king is in view for both. Now, what's interesting about the book of Ezra is that Ezra is actually talked about in Nehemiah. I think they were contemporaries. And so I'm going to read the intros to both of these books in my Bible to kind of give you a baseline for what each of the books are about. And yeah, there's crossover between the two, but again, they're still not talking about the same events. So we really need to understand and differentiate that, especially if we're going to discuss Daniel 9, 70 weeks prophecy. We really need to understand which book is in view, which Persian king is in view, and thus the dates associated, the months and dates associated. Because if you're going to use it as a starting point for a count, you need to be starting from the right spot. And I know that there is a lot of contention about these. Not sure why. But I know that there is, and so it doesn't really matter why there is. It just matters that I understand that there is and that we address this. So here's what my Bible says in the intro to the book of Ezra. Ezra continues the Old Testament narrative of 2nd Chronicles by showing how God fulfills his promise to return his people to the land of promise after 70 years of exile. Israel's second exodus, this one from Babylon, is less impressive than the return from Egypt because only a remnant chooses to leave Babylon. Ezra relates the story of two returns from Babylon. The first led by Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple, which is what actually, like the minor prophets Zechariah spent a lot of time discussing, and Haggai. Those are the two that come to mind. Those are discussing the direct aftermath, and those are going to be contemporaries with this time period as well. And of course, I sit down and my nose starts to run. My sinuses have been going crazy today. I think it's going to storm. Woke up with a headache right here. It's okay. Anyway, so Ezra relates the story of the two returns from Babylon, the first led by Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple. And again, that's what you're going to find in Haggai. Specifically in chapter 2, there's a very direct prophecy. And in the book of Zechariah, there's a significant portion of that book dedicated to the rebuilding of the second temple, along with imagery that correlates to the book of Revelation for the third temple in the future. So it's very interesting. That's where a lot of the setup imagery for the book of Revelation comes from, is those early chapters in Zechariah. So very interesting. But that's Ezra 1 through 6 is the Zerubbabel and the beginning of the rebuilding of the temple. And the second, under the leadership of Ezra, to rebuild the spiritual condition of the people, and so that's Ezra 7 through 10. Sandwiched between these two accounts is a gap of nearly 6 decades during which Esther lives and rules as queen in Persia. And so that would be what the book of Esther, and the king that was during that time was Xerxes. So you have Cyrus, who is the first Persian king, and we're going to start with him in Ezra 1. And then Esther is Xerxes, who was the Ahasuerus. That was just a title. But that was Xerxes the first, and then Nehemiah is Artaxerxes. So this is definitely during the Medo-Persian Empire, but the Persian kings are very important in this time period. Ezra is it doesn't matter. I'm not going to read that part. So just to give you a little bit of info. Now, Nehemiah, here's the intro to that book. Nehemiah, contemporary of Ezra and cupbearer to the king in the Persian palace, leads the third and last return to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile. So the first one was Cyrus and Zerubbabel and the rebuilding, the commencement of the rebuilding of the temple. And then you move into Esther and Xerxes, and then you move into Nehemiah and Artaxerxes. So there's a progression here, but they're all different, and they're all poignantly different, but it's under the Persian kings that all of this happens, and obviously Cyrus was the instigator of all of this change, positive change with regard to Israel. Does not mean he was directly responsible for it all happening, but he got it started. So, Nehemiah, his concern for the welfare of Jerusalem and its inhabitants prompts him to take bold action. Granted permission to return to his homeland, Nehemiah challenges his countrymen to arise and build the shattered wall of Jerusalem. And so that's where you bring in the Daniel 70 weeks prophecy, is to restore and to build Jerusalem. So this is the third return to from the Babylonian exile to Jerusalem. And that is where you meet the rebuilding of the city walls and city gates. That is the book of Nehemiah. In spite of opposition from without and abuse from within, the task is completed in only 52 days, a feat even the enemies of Israel must attribute to God's enabling. By contrast, the task of reviving and reforming the people of God within the rebuilt wall demands years of Nehemiah's godly life and leadership. So hopefully, if people are unfamiliar with these books, hopefully that has helped clarify the timeline and the actions, the outcomes that each of these Persian kings is responsible for with more clarity, in case there was a lack of clarity. So I'm just going to start reading through Ezra 1. These are books of history, and so I'm probably not going to read some of the names because undoubtedly I will not be able to pronounce them. So I'm just going to summarize or paraphrase those verses where these names are that I cannot pronounce, because I'm just going to be honest, I have no idea how to pronounce them. And probably half of the things that are Hebrew and or names I say wrong because I don't know Hebrew or how to pronounce them. So whatever, it is what it is. Ezra 1:1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven had given me all the kingdoms of the earth, because this was the global empire. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar's statue started with Babylon, the head of gold, moved into the chest and arms of silver, that's the Medo-Persian Empire, moved into the belly and thighs of brass, that's the Greek Empire, moved into the legs of iron and feet of iron and miry clay, that's your Revelation 13, beast, false prophet, and 10 kings. So this is Empire 2, and this would be related to the Babylon was the lion, this would be the bear, the Medo-Persian Empire, the leopard is the Greek Empire, and then the fourth, which is diverse, from the three that came before, had great iron teeth and devoured, break in pieces, stamped the residue with the feet of it. That's the legs of iron and feet of iron and miry clay, which is Revelation 13, beast, false prophet, and 10 kings. So this would be when you're looking at Daniel, the statue and the four beasts comparing side by side. This would be your chest and arms of silver and the bear. Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So again, this is the first return of Israel to Israel, of the Israelites to Israel in the aftermath of the Babylonian captivity for the express purpose of rebuilding the temple, not the city, the temple. Verse 3, who is there among you of all this people, of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to tie in at least parts of Daniel to this because it's very relevant. I just have to find Daniel. Ezekiel, Daniel 1:1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. So this was the first of the three Judaic kings that were attributed to parts of the Babylonian captivity: Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. Jehoiakim was the Judaic king on the throne when the first exile occurred, Jehoiakim when the second exile occurred, and Zedekiah when the third and final exile occurred, which led to the sacking of Jerusalem and the destroying of Solomon's temple. But at the very beginning of the Babylonian captivity, the first of those three exiles, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure of the house of his God. So basically what they're doing is they're taking the vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had carted away from Israel in the first exile of the Babylonian captivity, and they're returning it back to the house that they're going to rebuild in Jerusalem. So, this is where he says, let the men of his place help him with the silver, the gold, the goods, with the beasts, and the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So it's the vessels that were carted captive by Nebuchadnezzar returning to the place where they will be used. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, because those are the two tribes associated with the house of Judah, and it was the Judaic kings, it was the house of Judah that was taken captive by Babylon. The house of Israel, those northern 10 tribes, fell to the Assyrians around 720 something BC, so a while before this. And then the Judaic kings lasted 120-ish, 130, 40 years longer, and the end of their reigns came with circa 586 BC, with that third and final exile of the Babylonian captivity, where Jerusalem was sacked and destroyed. So Judah and Benjamin are related to the southern kingdom, the house of Judah. Anyway, then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the capital of the house of Judah. Jerusalem being on the lot of land, parcel to the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin is represented by the jasper stone in the breastplate that the high priest wore in the book of Exodus, which is why in Revelation 21, 22, 21, New Jerusalem is in sight like unto a jasper, because that's related to Benjamin. And in this earthly world, Jerusalem is on the plot of land associated to the tribe of Benjamin, who's represented by the jasper. So, anyway, interesting. Lots of links through the Bible, so it's fun to point them out. Verse 6, all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, gold, with goods, with beasts, and with precious things, beside all that were willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Again, we go back to Daniel 1, where I just read. Even those did Cyrus, king of Persia, bring forth by the hand of Mithridath, the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them: 30 chargers of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 29 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of a second sort, 410, and other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and of silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar, bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. So I think that that's long enough to kind of give us an intro into this book and to understand the differences and the time lapse between Ezra and Nehemiah, and why Ezra is going to be mentioned in Nehemiah a fair amount of time, because they were contemporaries. And yet the context of both of the books starkly different. They were attributed to different Persian kings over the span of 7 decades in total. So yeah, of course they're going to be talking about different things. So hopefully this gave you guys more of an intro. I was going to go through the whole book of Ezra. I don't think I need to do that. I think hopefully this is just, if you guys are interested in researching this further, I'm going to encourage you guys to read the book of Ezra. And learn more about how that is specifically temple related. Again, chapters 1 through 6 are going to be contemporary with Haggai and Zechariah. So if you research those further out, you'll see very much crossover with those between the first 6 chapters of Ezra. And then chapters 7 through 10 are going to be about 60 to 70 years later. And then Nehemiah picks up in those later parts during a third king, because again, the Cyrus was at the beginning, and then you've got Esther, which is Xerxes in the interim, and then you've got Artaxerxes even later. And Nehemiah is tied to Artaxerxes, but Artaxerxes will also be mentioned in Ezra in those later chapters. So there's a lot of crossover, but there are different time periods, different kings, and different things in view. So I'm going to leave it here. Hopefully, if this has piqued your interest and you are wanting to delve in further, you can do that on your own. But if you have any questions, let me know. I'll see you guys later.